Okay, today we're going to go over multiplying and dividing rational numbers. You need to have these rules written down in your notebook, please. The rules for multiplication are that a negative times a negative equals a positive times a positive equals a negative times a negative equals a negative, and a positive times a positive equals a positive. These are the same rules for division, so if you look at the comparison between here and here, they're exactly the same thing. It's just that this is multiplication and this is division. So please take a minute to copy these down in your notes. We're going to move on to multiplying and dividing whole numbers. So when we multiply two numbers together, you just multiply them together and then ask about your sign. So we have a negative 8 times 5. We know that 8 times 5 is 40. So therefore, our answer is going to be 40. But then we need to go back in here and ask ourselves, what is a negative times a positive? A negative times a positive is a negative. So our answer is going to be negative 40. Moving over here, this is a division problem. We have negative 64 divided by negative 8. Now, if this were just a regular problem, 64 divided by 8 would be at 8. But because I have a negative divided by a negative, we know that that should be a positive. So that's going to be a positive 8 right here, because we have a negative divided by a negative. And as if we look up here, a negative divided by negative is a positive. Moving on, we're going to go to decimals. These are the rules for multiplying decimals. You need to line the numbers up, not the decimals. We multiply, and then count your number of decimal places, and then move the decimal from right to left. So please pause the video so that you could write those down. Okay, we're going to go ahead and look at this problem here. What's nice about this is that we can actually do the decimals second, and we can do the signs first. So we notice here that we have a negative times a negative. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive, so we know our answer is going to be positive. Now, when I write this down, 2.73, again, I do not line my decimals up. I'm going to line my numbers up. So the 4 goes directly under the 3, and then the 5 goes next to the 4, which is directly under the 7. And then we multiply like we normally do. 4 times 3 is 12. Carry the 1. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 1 is 29. Put down the 9, carry the 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. Notice that I'm not bringing any decimals down. Leave the decimals alone. Just worry about the numbers. I'm going to put an X here because this 5 is in the 10 spot. It's not in the 1 spot. So 5 times 3 is 15. Carry the 1. 5 times 7 is 35. Plus 1 is 36. 5 times 2 is 10. Plus 3 is 13. So then we're going to add these together. That's 2. 9 plus 5 is 14. Carry the 1. 6, 0, and 1 makes 7. 3 and 1 make 4. And then 1 comes down. I count my decimal places. There are 2 decimal places here and 1 decimal place here. We count the spaces to the right of the decimal. So we have a total of 3 decimal places. So I'm going to move my decimal, which would normally go here for a whole number. I'm going to move it once, twice, 3 times. So this is my final answer for multiplication. For division, you have to use long division. The first number goes inside the house. If there's a decimal on the outside, you need to move it to make it a whole number. And then if you move the number on the outside, you have to move the decimal, if you move the decimal on the outside, you have to move the decimal on the inside also. So, I'm going to write this down. 1.26 goes on the inside. This goes on the outside. Let's look at our signs. We have a negative divided by a positive. So therefore, a negative divided by a positive is going to be a negative. So we know our answer is going to have to be negative. I notice here on the outside, I have a decimal place here. I want this to be a 7. In order for this to be a 7, the decimal has to go here, which means I need to move my decimal 1, 2, 3 times. If I move this decimal 3 times, I have to move this decimal 3 times. 1, 2, 3, which means I have to put a placeholder of a 0 there. So we go ahead and start to divide. 7 goes into 1 how many times? That's 0 times. 7 goes into 12 how many times? That's once. 1 times 7 is 7. We subtract. We get 5. Bring down the 6. 7 times what is 56? That should be an 8. 7 times 8 is 56. I get 0. I do have to bring this extra 0 down. How many times does 7 go into 0? Notice that the decimal is here. I have to put something here. So 7 goes into 0 0 times. So my final answer is negative 180. The next thing we're going to go over is fractions. The rule for multiplication is that you multiply straight across and you reduce your answer. So I have a negative 3/8 here times 4/5. So again, the rule, multiply straight across. So I do a negative 3 times 4, which is a negative 12. 8 times 5 is 40. And that negative either is going to go up on top or in the bottom. It does not go both ways. It can only go one way. So make sure that, again, you understand that. That negative is either in the numerator or it's in the denominator. It is not in both places. If it were in both places, it would look like this, which then would force it to be positive. But this is not a positive fraction. This is a negative fraction. I notice here that I have 4 and 8, so I'm going to divide each of these by 4. So I get negative 3 over 10. That's my final answer right there. For division, you need to multiply by the reciprocal. What that means is the flipped version of the second fraction. So we've used quite a few of these in class: copy, dot, flip, keep, change, rearrange, skip, flip, multiply. Use any of these that you want to use. So that means that this stays, this changes to multiplication, and this needs to flip. So negative 2/3 multiplied. I'm going to stick this negative in my numerator. So it's going to be a negative 4/7. Negative 2 times a negative 4 is going to give me a positive 8, and 3 times 7 is 21. Now, if you had stuck that negative down in the denominator with the 7, you would have gotten the same answer. So negative 2 times a positive 4 is a negative 8. 3 times a negative 7 gives you a negative 21. And these two negatives right here turn into positives because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. If you need to watch this video again, it will be available on Google Classroom. Please try to do your best to get as many done as you can in class. And if you have questions, please talk to the sub, or if you need to check your work, the sub can also check your work. Thanks.